Okay, I think we'll continue. I hope we don't have a participant limit here. So let's just continue with the thing that we were discussing. I think Vinod, the question that you were asking was what is the folder structure? So I'm assuming you're talking specifically about mean.io. Is that right? Um, is Vinod here? Yeah, I don't think he's here. Uh, yeah, so I think we'll take that question later because this person is not here. So in the meantime, let me just go back to what we were discussing about, the concept of JavaScript everywhere, and uh, we were discussing about what the web application stack looks like. So basically, what we have is in the client side, we have AngularJS, and on the server side, we have uh, something like Express that is running, and in the database, we have MongoDB. And all of these three layers actually talk the same language. So this, you know, the server is actually written with Express. Uh, the client side code actually runs with Angular. So this is what the uh, entire stack looks like. Uh, right. So now, the question obviously is why, Angular itself in the client side, why Express.js on the server, and why MongoDB? Um, so let me just give you a little bit of background about these technologies, Express here, Angular here, and MongoDB. So the good thing about the Angular framework is that, there is a concept of two-way data binding. And what two-way data binding gives you is an ability to actually bind changes in your UI to some kind of a data model, and also to bind changes in data to changes in the UI automatically. So let's take a quick example of an application, and I'll just help you understand what two-way data binding really means. So let's assume that we are building an application to manage contacts, and so there is a list of contacts on the server, and we want to actually yes, I'm going to just share my screen. So here's a simple application that's built with AngularJS. So what we can essentially do here is we can get a list of contacts from the server, and we can just add a contact here, uh, and the information gets added over here. We can delete a contact, we can edit a contact, we can just change the contact details, and we can save it. Now, this is a very typical web application where there is full CRUD happening on entities. Now, what used to happen earlier, before the concept of two-way data binding came into picture, is that in the era of jQuery and other frameworks, what we used to have is okay, one second. So let's say that there's a client which is actually requiring some data from the server. So the client would actually, after loading the application from the server, it would probably make an AJAX call to the server to get this data. And once the client receives this information, this is the flow that it goes through. So it basically parses the JSON data and converts it into a JavaScript object, and then it takes this JavaScript object and renders a table. Now this particular thing is what we call as DOM manipulation, right? So it renders it as a table, and this is what that would look like, right? So we would basically build a table like this using the data that is actually coming from the server. Uh, Unfortunately, the problem with this flow is, suppose the user modifies the data here. So if he just goes and edits some of the information here and clicks save, where exactly is that data sitting? How do we really, recreate the data model from the UI that we're seeing here? So the data is actually, sitting in these text fields. So if I just go ahead and change some information here, uh, and when I'm about to click save, now the information is actually sitting in these text fields. So I have to now somehow pull this data out of the UI components and then make a call to the server. So the flow would look somewhat like, from the UI components in the page, we are actually pulling this data out and creating some kind of a model, and then this model is then pushed into the server side. And then if the server actually makes some modifications and we want to refresh the table, we have to kind of follow these steps again. And this started becoming a very cumbersome thing, because there are so many things happening within a client-side application. Like Divjot said, we are moving into an era of single-page applications. So there will be a lot of things happening within the page. So ultimately, when you think about a page, there'll be like a lot of UI components, and these UI components probably are also talking to each other. So what we wanted was better state management in the client side. We want some mechanism to actually, connect these UI components to some kind of a data model. And that is what Angular was built for. It's like it can easily help us connect data to UI and UI to data. Now let me just show you what this code looks like, so that you get some kind of an idea. Now this code is purely written as JavaScript code, and then we can actually connect this information to the server-side component. And if you guys are about to get started with mean stack, I think one of the ways you can think about looking at all the technologies is think about building the application purely as a client-side application. You could probably even just hard code a few of the models to begin with, and then slowly you can integrate a server-side component and then pull out this information and get it served from a server, right? So here, this is the data model, and right now this component is, this model is hard coded here. But just look at the code in terms of the HTML. This is the kind of HTML that we have, and what we're essentially saying is we want a header in the page, and we want a container which is actually showing our contacts, and inside this just saying contacts here, right? Now, what is contacts really? So if you look at the templates, this is what the table looks like. And the most important thing here is Angular provides called directives, which helps us to bind our data model to components in the page, right? So there's something called a ng repeat, for example, where we can say that we want to get hold of a model called contacts, iterate on this list of contacts, pull out one contact at a time, and then for each of those contacts, we want to create a row and show a table of this form. Now, the nice thing about this data binding is if the contacts changes, if the list of contacts changes due to any action, the table automatically gets refreshed. You don't have to write any code to say, go and update the table, because this is what declarative binding is all about. We are just saying that the rows in this table are connected to the list of contacts. So whenever there is any change to the list of contacts, the corresponding rows get updated automatically. Uh, so because of this, the code that we write gets radically simplified, because you can see what the code looks like when we are just adding a new contact. We are just saying, you know, take the new contact details and add it to the array of contacts, and that's pretty much it. There's not a single line of code here saying go and update the table and add a new row. In fact, if you look at this entire code, which is what we call as a controller, the entire controller code is written with absolutely no UI manipulation at all. And this is how it is supposed to be. Controllers in AngularJS need to be written such that there's no UI manipulation happening within the controllers. And the UI is kind of something that is automatically managed because of the bindings that we would have provided within our HTML. And this is what Angular really helps with, and this is the reason why it has become very popular. And in fact, one of the things that they have done is they have actually used a different way of actually detecting what model changes happen. Uh, the way they do it is, in a very intelligent way, they kind of detect what changes have happened, and they also run this detection at very specific times when there are some actions that are happening in the UI. And because of this, from a developer perspective, the code gets radically simplified. And so this is the reason why Angular has become very popular. Now, what are some of the alternatives to Angular if you're looking at a client-side framework which is probably going to give you some very similar things? Now, first of all, there's actually, in the earlier days, there was something called Backbone JS. Now, this is slowly losing its popularity because of Angular coming into picture, but probably this was one of the first popular frameworks which had some kind of a mechanism to observe changes to models, right? So we had, uh, something called Backbone, which provided this kind of binding. So Backbone's strengths were with its model sync abilities with the server and ability to detect changes to the model. But where Backbone was not too great at is, the ability to actually detect UI changes and then update the model automatically. So that ability was not that great with Backbone. So then after some time, we had another framework called Knockout, which came into picture. Now, Knockout was really good with its two-way data binding abilities. So if you look at a piece of code here, it sort of looks very similar to how it is in Angular. Within your HTML, you can actually bind it to some kind of a data model. Now, tickets here, for example, is the model that we are binding it to. So there are all these abilities in Knockout, but Knockout is not like a full-fledged end-to-end framework. So it doesn't have nice abilities to sync this data with the server and stuff like that. So in fact, there was a third project called Knockback where people tried to combine the best of both worlds. They tried to combine Knockout's two-way data binding abilities and Backbone's abilities to actually uh, sync the model with the server. So all of these were some of the solutions that were tried out. In fact, one more project that was around was called Durandal. Uh, Durandal also has a few nice ideas, and some of these are probably going to be incorporated into the next version of Angular. So that's what is in the news right now. Uh, so these were some of the yesteryear, I wouldn't say yesteryear, but people still do use some of these frameworks, but these were some of the solutions that were there. But Angular suddenly rose in popularity because the way they detect changes to data models is very, very different. If you look at something like Backbone or Knockout, you will see that when you're using these data models, um, you can't just go ahead and use these models as if they are just plain JavaScript objects. Like for example, here when we talk about a sidebar as a data model, you can't just say, okay, sidebar dot color is equal to white. Rather, you need to basically call a setter function and you have to pass the fields that need to be set into it. Now, why is it done like this? Because essentially, within the set function, it ends up informing observers of this changes to these fields. And, the observers could be something that can go ahead and update the UI, or something. So these data bindings were made possible because of functions like these that were implemented. And if you look at Knockout, they tried to do it a little differently, but essentially, you still couldn't just work with plain JavaScript objects. So here, what they do is if you have a model like this, and if you want to make a change to some value, you need to sort of call it as a ko.observable of this object, and to set a value, you have to kind of pass it through a person like a set a function. Then the name of the field kind of becomes a function, and if you want to change the value, you have to kind of call this function to change the value. Now, yeah, I mean, all of this made, it was possible for you to get things to work with this, but things start becoming really cumbersome, especially when you're working with, composite objects. Like, for example, if you have an array of models that you want to observe changes to, it really starts becoming cumbersome to work with these frameworks. Angular, on the other hand, if you look at the code here, when I want to work with something like a contacts object, I just go ahead and just do a regular push. Push is just a JavaScript function. So we just call this and we are able to uh, make changes to the uh, object. Yeah, 1 second. Okay, so there's somebody that needs to be added. I'm just checking. I don't think. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to send out an invite to somebody. Yeah, so coming back to Angular, if you look at the way we work with JavaScript objects in the Angular world, it is just regular JavaScript objects. So there is nothing like a setter function that we need to call, or any function that needs to be called. So how does Angular really know that this object has changed? So what they do is internally they run some kind of a cycle and they try and look at every single object and look at the diff for that object, which is called a digest cycle. and they try to determine what has really changed. And so this approach has been very different from what the regular two-way data binding frameworks have taken. And partly the reason for its popularity is this. And of course, it's Google which is doing this. So, they do have mechanisms to dictate a few things about how things could be. Now, in order to make something like this really fast, are now doing is they are actually uh, introducing a function in JavaScript called object.observe. And this is essentially something that can be used. So this is a native JavaScript implementation, which is already part of browsers like Chrome. So, it becomes very easy to actually observe changes to data models by just setting a, listener on any object changes. So hopefully Angular will be using this in future, and the changes to data models can be observed much faster than the way they are doing it right now. So which means the good news about all this is you can essentially end up building very client-side heavy applications in future, and they're probably going to be very good in terms of their performance. So, these are some of the reasons why Angular has become a very popular framework on the client side. And now coming to MongoDB, before we come to JavaScript, let's look at what the strengths of MongoDB is. And primarily, the benefit that we get with MongoDB is the SQL equivalent of performing queries in MongoDB is actually JavaScript. So in MongoDB, whenever we need to make any changes to data, any kind of CRUD operations we need to perform on data, we can just go ahead and issue some we basically write some code in JavaScript to really get this done. uh, so so just to give you a quick uh, so, in the Mongo shell, this shell is essentially just a JavaScript shell. So you can essentially start writing some JavaScript code here, and you'll see that it can understand this. Uh, so, in other words, you don't need to learn a new language to work with your database. The language is the same, and the language is just JavaScript. It doesn't allow this.
What invitation?
No, it's not working.
They're not able to join the call.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
still 10.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, are you not able to add them?
No, because this right is only for you.
Okay.
Click on that.
I don't think there's.
It's not possible.
Okay, if you can just post it and get me the names, I'll add them to the.
How will you add them?
You can just send me. I think I can give them an invite.
No, the same guy.
Oh, so he was not able to
No, he
join?
was not able to join.
Okay.
Can you ask them if they know something?
Yeah, so looks like there's some issue even over here to get people to join the Hangout. Is there anything else that we could do? Does anybody have any suggestions? Okay, I think we'll just continue. So it's still looking like people are finding it a little hard to join the Hangout. So probably we need to do something for the next Hangout session that we'll conduct. So yeah, let's just go back to what we were discussing about MongoDB. So you know why MongoDB has become a little popular in the mean stack is because it's very easy for us to really work with MongoDB. If you understand JavaScript, it's just a step away for you to really understand how to work with MongoDB. You know, so for example, suppose I have a list of contacts. So I just that the contacts have a uh, name and place. So, you know, suppose I have a list of contacts like this. You can see that it's just a regular JavaScript object, and you want to really store this in the database. It's just a step away. You know, you could just say use some database name. So you could say use contacts DB, and then you could just say db dot contacts dot save of contacts, right? So you could basically just give it a list of objects like this, and it just goes and sits in the database, right? And you can see that when I perform a find, you can see this data. You could even perform a query on a specific field, like you with the name Gautam, uh, and you just get this data. And all of this data is sitting in the database. It's already persisted, right? And this is the beauty of it. You can see that the kind of functions that we work with and the way we work with it is very similar to just working with JavaScript. So when you think about a full stack developer, when somebody needs to write code to work with client side, server side, and databases, earlier, you know, he would need to learn at least three different things. One is a server side language, which was either Java, Python, Ruby. It was not JavaScript until recently, right? So we would have to learn one of these languages. In the client side, you don't have a choice. You have to learn JavaScript because there's no other language which the client side can understand, at least nothing that is standard. So you don't have a choice with the client side language. It has to be JavaScript. And on the database front, you had to learn SQL, right? So, you know, what has happened in the recent past, I think the primary reason why this happened was Google launched Chrome with an extremely fast engine called V8 for JavaScript. And suddenly people's perspective on what JavaScript is changed. Until then, people really shied away from writing JavaScript code. In fact, Google themselves attempted to build a framework where you can write your entire web application with a single language, but that language used to be Java, and it was called the Google Web Toolkit, right? So yeah, so we had solutions like this where you can essentially build your entire application with a single language, and that language would be you know, Java. But then, you know, once Google launched something like Chrome, people suddenly started thinking, okay, so JavaScript is probably not that bad. We could probably use it across the board. You know, why can't we use it on the server side? And so if you really think about what Node.js is, it is nothing but the V8 engine neatly packaged so that you can run JavaScript code in the you know, server as well. And you know, even something like the MongoDB shell ends up using you know, engine like this to really get your queries and answer them. Of course, the real kernel of MongoDB would be written with a lower level language. I think it's C++, but then the shell that is running here is all JavaScript. So now think about an application like this, where we are trying to get a list of contacts from the client side, uh, and we want to get this data into the server, and then we want to get this data into the database. So, there are three layers now. So what is it that we can do? So the client side understands JavaScript. You can now take a JavaScript object, convert it into JSON, send it to the server. The server can then use a MongoDB connector and just take this JavaScript object and literally just push it to the MongoDB database, right? So think about what that means from a application development perspective. If you have something like this working in your client-side application, it's probably just 2 or 3 statements away from really getting into your database. And that is really what we are trying to solve with stack like mean, because we just want to make sure that everything across the board is neatly standardized with one language, which is JavaScript. And I believe this is one of the primary reasons why the mean stack generally is gaining in popularity. Uh, so yeah, and finally coming to the server side, MVC framework. Now here I would really say that there are so many frameworks that are coming out, and right now we are in a state of flux. There is no one framework which is really the best. Express is definitely very popular, but then if you just go and search for Node.js MVC framework, you will just find so many of them, right? Uh, Yeah, so there is Sales, and there's so many frameworks, and Express is just one of the various frameworks. And like I said, there are just so many frameworks which are coming out uh, every month, right? Uh, and so I wouldn't say right now there's a clear winner on the server side. Many of them do use Sales. In fact, Meteor is another framework which is really gaining in popularity. So one of the nice things about Meteor is that it's very good if you're trying to build a real-time application, and they also have some kind of a lightweight database of sorts which can sit in your data in your client side, and that syncs with the server side. So actually, this is one of the other frameworks which is really gaining in popularity, and the reason for that is here. Angular really is server agnostic, meaning it doesn't really need to know what the server side is written with. You can use Angular with even something that's not necessarily Node on the server side. But when you use this, you need to now learn two different MVC frameworks. One which is Angular on the client side, and another which is server side framework, right? Uh, so the benefit of using something like Meteor is it's a single framework which you can use both in the client side as well as on the server. So yeah, the good thing about Express is it's very, very simple to get started. It's if you understand Node.js, it's just about 3 or 4 lines from there, and you at least have a simple application up and running. And it has all the basic things that you need. So it has good routing functionality, which helps you connect your URL routes to some controller function. And from here, you can now basically start doing your functionality to either talk to databases or third-party web services and stuff. Get all the data that you need, render it as basically create a response and then send that response to the client side. And they also have good integration with various templating facilities. So you could be using something like Jade or maybe even Mustache or one of the various templating solutions on the server side. So it's written in a very flexible way. So, nothing is mandatory here. You can easily switch the templating language that you want to use. You can easily use a different authentication framework if you want to. So that's what Express is. And yeah, so the good thing about Express is it's very easy to get started. So this is what has been popularly called mean stack. Now, to really get started with mean, you just have to install MongoDB and use Node.js with Express on the server side. And then on the client side, you just have to use AngularJS, right? So that becomes your entire mean stack. Now, in addition to that, if you want something even more simpler where you want everything installed upfront and you want some kind of directory structure already created, you could look at something like mean.io. But if you need more flexibility on each of the individual pieces, then I would suggest that you know, you connect these pieces individually yourself. So that's what I would say. So that's just a quick overview on the mean stack. So to answer Vinod's question, yeah, it's really a matter of choice with regard to whether you should be using something like Yeoman generators or mean.io. On one side, it's more flexible. You can mix and match things with something like Yeoman. On the other end is a complete end-to-end solution which you can just get started with, right? So that's what I would say. So I'll move on to the questions which Divjot has put in. So first of all, are there any good free hosting services to host a Node app? I'm sorry. Uh, I think App Engine has a mechanism to actually work with Node.js. So you could, look at how you could be working with Node.js with App Engine. Now remember, Google actually has two cloud application solutions, right? One is in the PaaS area, one is in the IaaS area. The PaaS solution is what they call as App Engine, and the IaaS solution is what they call as uh, cloud. What is it called? It was called uh, yeah, Google Cloud Platform, something like that. I don't remember. So a compute engine, sorry. Yeah, it's called the compute engine. So with App Engine, you have a completely managed environment. So you could basically write your Node application and just deploy it. And so this is something that you could be looking at. And the other solution is Heroku. Uh, Here also you could essentially deploy a Node application in the cloud. Okay, but let me just tell you this: there's no such thing as a free lunch. Most of these solutions are free up to a certain usage. So beyond which you may have to pay for it. And believe me, it's not a whole lot. In fact, uh, the cheapest solutions, if you look at some of the cloud solutions like DigitalOcean, you get something at $5 with a 512 meg RAM and stuff like that. So it's like uh, going with a cloud solution is probably not that expensive. You may have to pay a little, but it's probably still okay. So that's what I would suggest. I'm not sure about other free hosting solutions, but if there's anything that you guys want to add, feel free to do that. So my suggestion is look at something which is a cheap, cloud VPS, sorry, a cloud solution. Uh, that's probably going to be better because when you use something like Google App Engine or Heroku, what happens is these are past solutions. So with past solutions, essentially, they provide a certain mechanism, they provide a certain way of doing things. So your entire deployment and the way you write your code sometimes will have to adhere to how the framework wants it. Okay, so for example, the way you work with databases in the App Engine world, uh, because the database is managed by the App Engine framework, you have to write it in a certain way. So you're not free to just use any database you want. You can't just integrate any third-party library so easily. So you run into a lot of these edge conditions. So it's not a, full-fledged hosting environments, right? So these are some of the problems you would run into, which is why probably it's a good idea to just go with something where you just have a Linux login and you can just set up everything on your own. Okay. Of course, overhead is a little more, but you do have a little more of flexibility here. The second question is when not to use a NoSQL solution. Uh, it really depends on your requirements. So, if you look at something like MongoDB or Cassandra and stuff like that, these NoSQL solutions are really good when it comes to scale. But then, where they're probably not that great at is things like transaction management, and maybe if you need very fine-grained level of authentication, authorization, and stuff like that, probably they're not that great because they were not really built for handling these kind of requirements. Okay, so yeah, that is probably some of the areas where you should not be thinking about using a NoSQL solution. Maybe a traditional relational database kind of a solution is better. Okay. Uh, so yeah, and by the way, as we speak, some of these answers are changing because when I talk about things like authentication and authorization, MongoDB is really getting good at it. If you look at the 2.6 version, they have some bit of nice support for authentication and authorization at the level of at least collections, if not at a level of the document, which is at a record level, right? So yeah, some of these things are changing as we speak, but right now that is where the things like transaction management and stuff is not really that good with NoSQL solutions. Um so that's where I would say NoSQL wouldn't really work for you. And there is actually something called a cap theorem, which basically says you have to choose between these three things. There's consistency, availability, and partition tolerance. And you have to ask this question for yourself as to what is really important for you. Is consistency of the data more important, or is it that you want your database to be highly available? But probably it's okay if once in a while you do lose a write. So you have to kind of decide this for yourself depending on your application as to what makes more sense. And depending on that, probably some NoSQL solutions are better than the other. And yeah, so these are some of the things that you have to kind of consider before deciding what is the right solution. And another comment that I would make in this space is that right now, as we speak, the relational database world is not sitting quiet, so they are actually introducing a lot of these NoSQL like patterns in a relational database. For example, if you look at the Postgres database, Postgres now has good support for storing JSON data, within uh, a database table. This is non-standard, but it kind of gives you abilities which uh, NoSQL store is known for, which is flexible schema. So if you look at the MongoDB world, I gave you this example where we just took a list of contacts and we just persisted it in the database. So one thing about MongoDB is these fields are not defined upfront. So you could essentially, it's like imagine having a relational database where the table schema is not upfront defined, but the table schema is part of every row, right? It's like the schema is part of every row. So when you're inserting a record, you can decide what fields that record needs to have. Uh, so two records within the same table in the MongoDB world can have a very different set of fields. So that is a schema, a flexibility that you get. And it's not just with MongoDB, most of the NoSQL databases give you this flexibility. Now, what I'm trying to tell is some of these patterns are coming into the relational database world also. So as we speak, the relational databases are implementing a lot of features which NoSQL stores try to provide, and the NoSQL stores are trying to provide solutions which relational databases are have been very good at, historically. So yeah, right now again, there is some kind of confusion about what is the right solution. So it really depends on, like I said, things like consistency, availability, partition tolerance, how flexible does your schema need to be, those kind of things. Uh, yeah, so next, Princia has asked a question about how to deploy Node.js applications in production. Now, when we talk about deploying a Node.js application, I'm assuming that there is some framework which comes into picture. So it could be something like Express.js or Sails or something. So when you're trying to deploy this application, essentially this is what the pattern would look like. So you would have so you'd have a server which is running our Node.js application, and this application basically exposes some kind of a port. Okay, now the port could be something like 3000 or 8000 or 8080. These are the usual ports that we use. And usually what happens is on the same server, there is actually a, a full-fledged web server that is running, which could be Apache or Nginx or something like that. And essentially what we do is we have a reverse proxy setup. Okay, so you could install, if you're using Apache, you could have something like mod proxy setup, and you could say that anything at slash my app on this server should basically go to localhost colon 3000. Okay, so you can set this up in both directions so that when the data goes out, it also goes out with this thing. Okay, so you can just install you can basically just start your node server here and have a reverse proxy setup with something like Apache to point to Node.js. Okay, so this is what you can do. But the thing to note about Node is that Node is essentially single-threaded. Okay, so you have to be very careful about exceptions, because a single exception can basically bring down your entire server. Now, most of the MVC frameworks do have mechanisms where they have generic exception handling so that some of these possible issues are avoided. But a more popular solution is what you do is you run Node.js as a cluster of processes. So you have like multiple of these Node.js processes which are running as child processes. Okay, and there is one application which you can start. So you call this as some kind of a cluster setup. Okay, now there is some kind of cluster support built into Node.js, which you could be looking at. But I've actually evaluated a few other things that you could probably be interested in when you're thinking about doing a production Node.js deployment. Okay, so you could be using something like PM2, and PM2 is good because what PM2 gives you is an ability to run a cluster of Node.js applications, and it also has monitoring. Okay, so if any of your processes actually gets killed, then it immediately starts a new process. Okay, so I can just quickly show you what that looks like. Okay. Okay, so I'll just start system. Um, okay, so I'm just going to create a simple project to show you what something like PM2 can do. So let's application. I'm just going to do a npm init. Okay, and so now I'm just going to do I'm going to write a simple script. And what the script does is after about 5 seconds or so, it actually just throws an exception. Okay, so let me just give it as 3 seconds. So after 3 seconds, it actually throws an exception, and the moment the exception is thrown, this process would just get killed. So let me just show you what that looks like. So now if I just run it as node with index.js, so you can see that after 3 seconds, the script got killed. Now what I'm trying to demonstrate is what would happen if you have a unhandled exception in your code. So imagine you have this kind of a setup now in your production environment, and your application is being written in Node and Apache is connecting to this, and suddenly there is an exception here. It can basically bring down your entire application, right? So what you can do is you can install something like PM2, and with PM2 you can create a cluster of machines, sorry, cluster of processes, and whenever one of the processes gets killed, PM2 will automatically restart it for you. So let me just show you what happens when we run the same thing with PM2. And by the way, PM2 is not the only solution. There's another one which is called Forever. Yeah, so you could also be looking at this one as well. Okay, there seems to be some error with the installation. Uh, okay, I probably, yeah, there's some internal error. I guess, this location probably is not pingable right now. But anyway, you can try this. So when you install PM2, you can then just, instead of starting with node directly, you can just start it with PM2. And then what will happen is it essentially starts multiple processes. You can define how many processes you want. Um, so if you have like a 4-core machine, you can basically start 4 processes, right? So that will essentially act like some kind of a load balancer, as well as it helps with failovers as well. Uh, yeah, so this is one of the solutions that I would suggest you guys can have a look at. Yeah, so
Hi, Gautam.
yeah.
Okay, thanks for the solution. Yes, so basically my question was, so if you were deploying a Java application,
Mm-hmm.
you could package it as a WAR file and then send it up to the server, right?
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, so if it was a Java application which was running on a Tomcat server,
Mm-hmm.
we basically we get a WAR file out of it and deploy it.
Right, right.
So is there any
You're
such?
asking what is the equivalent of that in the node
Yes,
world?
yes, yes.
Okay. So actually there is, let me just, uh, help you understand this better. So think about it. When you're talking about Java world,
Hmm,
the war file is basically created because, one, Java is not a interpreted environment. So what happens is you have to kind of compile your Java code into class files. So you need something to basically hold these class files together, and that is what is what gets used at runtime, right? So
yes,
essentially, if you think about what the war file contains, it's basically a zip of class files. And
yes,
secondly, what it contains is configuration about how to so what is a web XML, which allows you to define the mapping and stuff like that, right? So
hmm,
if you think about the Node.js world, first of all, JavaScript, there is nothing like compilation, right?
hmm,
So because of that, you don't really need anything. You can just put this Node.js application in some kind of a deploy directory and run it with a certain user who probably has privileges only to read and write to this directory, right?
hmm,
That's pretty much it. And in the modern day world, you could probably look at something like Docker as a possible solution to package your
hmm.
uh, application as some kind of a container. But yeah, there's nothing necessarily like a war file equivalent here. It's like you just take the uh, directory and just cd to that directory and just run a command to
Uh,
start the server.
yeah. So basically, I was
And
giving a no hub command. So is it right? Uh,
yes, if you're running it, directly, then yes, you could do something like NoHub.
hmm,
But if you look at something like Docker, basically there is some mechanism that they can use to demonize it. You could also write some kind of a service. So
hmm.
earlier there was something called a start-stop Node.js application into a service. One of the things that you need to take care of is what happens if your application gets killed because there is an operating system restart. So, if there's a restart of the operating system, does your Node.js application come back up? So you need some kind of an init, script which can basically bring back your Node.js application. So because of that, maybe, if you just run it as no hub, it's all right, but you should just think about what happens in case of accidental restarts of your operating system. So there are some slightly better ways to do it. So for example, Docker does have mechanisms where when the service restarts, it can restart all the containers that are running. If you look at the core OS world, there's something called Fleet, can actually keep checking for the Docker containers, and the moment system goes down, it can literally take that container and deploy it in a different environment altogether. So you do have some practices which are used in production, but if you're thinking about manually doing it, yes, you could use NoHub. Okay. The other thing you have to kind of think about is better ways to log information. So you could be using something like Winston. So this is one of the logging frameworks that you could be looking at, so that you don't lose out on any of the logs that are generated. Uh, yeah, and there's something called Bunyan as well. So in the Node.js world, so you could be looking at one of these logging frameworks to, uh, collate your logs. So as long as you have taken those things into consideration, and also if there is proper monitoring of your application, so that in case there is a failure of your node application, you get some kind of a message, I think the production environment is okay. Okay. Yeah, so short answer, no direct equivalent of a war file. Just take the directory, run your node application there. That's it. Okay. So then there's one question from Bashar. Is there any free hosting service for MongoDB where I can create a shard for learning? Uh, See, if you're just learning it, you don't need a hosting service, right? What I would suggest is, you know, typically when we conduct our trainings, we just start multiple multiple MongoDB servers within a single system. So you can literally keep running your MongoD command multiple times with, unique DB path and a port. And as long as you have given a unique DB path and a port, you can basically create a sharded setup. I can just give you a quick example of what that would look like, just to help you understand it. So if you're interested in looking at a sharded setup, this is what it would look like. So you can, yeah, so you can basically run MongoD with a unique DB path and a unique port number, and you can run multiple MongoDB servers in the same machine. Okay, so you just give a fork, give a log path, and you just have to give shard servers. If you are planning to run it with replica set configurations, you can give a replica set ID as well. So if you can do something like this, if your purpose is to learn, I think you can just do this on a single machine. If you guys are doing this on a 64-bit machine, also add minus minus small files, because otherwise what will happen is it creates a data directory which can take up quite a bit of space. So just add a minus minus small files option. Okay. So yes, you could look at solutions like this. Uh, if and you can basically simulate, the auto sharding feature. You can look at failovers in the case of replica sets. All of those things can be looked at locally, so you can try out all this locally. I am not aware of anything where you get MongoDB with sharding in a free, hosted environment. So yeah, I'll put this question to the group. Do you guys know if there is any other solution like this? I'm hearing somebody, but the voice is a little feeble. You're talking about Mongo Labs, is it? Okay.
You're saying Mono Lab 500 MB free.
Okay, great. And this one is it comes with features like sharding. Is it Mongo or Mono Lab?
It's Mongo. It's Mongo. Sorry.
Mongo Lab. Okay. Okay. And yeah, so I guess usually what happens is with these guys, I'm sure, do they provide sharding facilities and stuff in the free environment? I'm not very sure, but anyway, I think we'll just uh, evaluate this in case. This one, right? Great. So is there any other questions? Actually, I don't have any specific content as such, but we just thought we will give this a test drive today and see how the online meetup goes. So if you guys have any other questions, you could either post it in the Google Drive, or you could just switch on your microphones, or you could just paste something and ask this. Yeah, so the directory structure, Vinod, you're asking about mean IO. I have actually not specifically worked with the mean IO application. So if you have the directory structure, you could just paste it, because I do remember what the directories contain. But I think if I remember it right, there is one directory which contains the server-side code, and then there is a public directory which contains the client-side code. Okay, and the server-side code contains something to hold your controllers, and one to hold your roots. And root is basically the one which does your URL mapping. So that is what becomes your entry point. It's like when a request comes in, that is the very first thing that happens. It's the URL mapping, and based on that, some controller functionality could be called. And after that, it's pretty much up to you to decide how you want to structure your code. I don't know if there's any other major thing that I missed out. I think there's a config directory which again contains configurations for where your server should be running and stuff like that. Is there anything else that you are specifically looking for? You could either switch on your microphone and ask it, or you could just paste, chat. Okay, so Divjot, in the chat, you have asked a question about, does this mean that the M is not a good option for production code? I think that's not necessarily the case. It's like not every application needs full transactional support. You can always have, applications where you need other things. You need good schema evolution abilities. You need good support for scaling the application, and MongoDB is great at all those things. So if you look at again, if you go back to the CAP theorem, MongoDB falls on the edge of consistency and partition tolerance. It's not really great with availability, but then there is a meter to tweak, which is called the right concern, where you can basically decide what you want. Is it more durability of data, or is it more availability? And so yeah, so MongoDB allows you to configure that. And so yeah, I wouldn't say that you can't use it in production, but you'd probably not use it as a backend for your banking application. You'd probably use it as a backend for your banking application reporting. So that's those are the kind of things, and that's not necessarily just with Mongo. I think um, pretty much most of the NoSQL stores, this is how it is going to be. Uh,
Basically, my point was that with the ongoing changes, there are a lot of choices for the database. So we don't
mhm.
really know which is the one single choice which we should go for. So that was my point. That is it like we should use this in the production code, or we still aren't sure that it might be good in future, but right now it's
See, yeah, so I think the future of any of these parts of your stack is you'll always have a lot of choices. So when you look at something like this, there will be umpteen number of client-side frameworks, which are all very good in their own respects. There'll be umpteen number of MVC frameworks and umpteen number of databases. And gone are the days when when a company just bets on one database. The companies where I go for my training, I usually get this thing that part of their application is running on Oracle, part of it is on SQL Server, part of it is on MongoDB, part of it is on some data warehousing solution, part of it is using Hadoop, and this is becoming the norm these days. It's like for a particular case in your application, if one database is good, you just go with it. And you can't expect that you'll get everything with a single database, because these are all areas where there will always be constant evolution, right? So in that sense, it's a question of, do you want to wait 10 years for the most perfect database, or do you want to get your application out now? So I think, whatever is the choice right now, you look at what is the best among them and you just build the application with that. Of course, one of the things that you would probably consider is make sure that your architecture is nimble for evolution. Tomorrow, if you believe that MongoDB is not the right suited database for your application, make sure that you can just switch that without having to rewrite a whole entire part of your application. So as long as these kind of considerations have been done upfront with your application architecture, I think you're good to go. And I think, of course, you should have good tests to ensure that during migration, you don't run into any trouble and stuff. And we have seen this time and again with any application, any startup which has essentially started becoming very popular. Sometimes they, would have used a certain language or framework or a database, and then they see that it doesn't really work for them, and then they migrate to something else. So I think one of the sites that is coming to my mind is the site called High Scalability, where you have a lot of case studies about how people have either moved to MongoDB from something else or moved away from MongoDB because of some issue that the database had, right? And it's not just MongoDB. It's like you can just compare any two databases. I'm sure if you just search for MongoDB versus Cassandra or something like that in Google, you will find a lot of articles which where people have compared these databases and tell you what are the pros and cons of each one. So you can try this with any combination of databases. And if you want to know what the various databases are, there's a site called NoSQL Databases. So nosqldatabase.org. So here you have a listing of the various database choices, and yeah, I mean, the point is, even as we speak today, there are production deployments of pretty much all of these databases. It's very hard to give a number as to how many people use this in production, and the reason being that there might be one company having a cluster of 100 servers, while there might be another database where there are fewer number of servers being used, but a lot of people use them. So it's very hard to get an appropriate number and to basically rank the sorry rank these databases. There's also a site called DB Engines, which has attempted to rank these databases based on things like the number of questions asked in Stack Overflow, or or maybe the number of mentions in Google search, stuff like that. It may not be the right way to really get the right rank for a certain database, but then there is nothing else we could do right now to say which is really the best. And yeah, if you really want to know who are using this in production, there's actually a page which actually lists this. So there are a lot of, most notably LinkedIn uses this, and there are a few other companies which actually do use MongoDB in production environments. So I think that notion of is it ready is not there. It's like these databases are mature enough, so I think you could start using it. In terms of books, somebody has asked a question: what is the latest mean book and most available in the market are on old releases? Believe me, this is always going to be the case with technology. So I think even if you get some very good online resource, I think that's probably always going to be better. So maybe the books that you should be buying are the ones which are probably good with concepts. They explain the concept very well, and even if there is a new release, probably the content in that book is really not outdated because the concepts still are the same. Maybe there are more features added, maybe a function call here and there might have changed, but the concepts probably still remain. And if you want the latest APIs and stuff, always the documentation for that framework is the place to look for, right? So, I mean, the short answer is don't use a hard book to actually look at the APIs and the technology, specifically. Look for books which are probably good with concepts. So, with things like MongoDB and stuff, I think there are some good books out there. Yeah, so I think there are a few communities. So if you look at the Google Plus community, there are some very nice forums. One forum on Node.js, one on AngularJS and stuff. And there you get a lot of tutorials which people keep posting. I think that is probably a better place to really get the latest tutorials if you're getting started. So that's what I would suggest. Is there anything that people would like to add? There is one link which Divjot has posted for Node.js. uh, yeah, but I have seen that some of the communities in Google Plus are very good. I don't see it's taking a lot of time to load here. But yeah, there's a nice community on Angular and one on Node.js. So they do have a lot of tutorials and other articles that they keep posting. Okay, so then there's one question from Abhi12 Ravi. If I know JavaScript and basics of AngularJS, how do I start with getting to know it better? I think you should be following it in this order because you already know Angular. So the very first thing you would be looking at is if, from your Angular code, when you make a $HTTP call, can you just write a simple server-side code to really, receive that request and then serve a response. So, that is probably the first part of the code you'll be writing. So you'll be starting with something like Node.js with Express.js. So let me just show you what that code would look like to help you understand it better. So you just create an Express application and yeah. So you can see that when the user accesses a URL like /contacts, we can send a response like this. So the code that I had shown you earlier about Angular had a list of contacts hard-coded. You can remove that hard coding by basically having something like this on the server. So you would be starting with some kind of URL mapping where you move the hard coding from the client side to the server, and now the data sits in the server like this, and it is sending this as a response when a call is made from the client to the server. So this is the next layer that you could be building. And once you have this in place, then depending on the database that you want, you could either integrate this with MongoDB or MySQL or one of the other databases. So if you're using MongoDB, you can first probably integrate, but just install MongoDB and just learn how the shell works. So your code would basically be something like this, where you're just learning how MongoDB works, how the shell works, how do you insert data, how do you retrieve data, how do you issue queries and stuff. So you learn this next, right? And then finally, you learn how MongoDB and Node.js can be used together. And that code would look somewhat like this. I can show you the code, but basically, you could be using something called Monk, which is basically a nice driver for MongoDB, which you can use in Node.js. It's actually not the driver itself, but it's a lightweight wrapper on top of the driver. So you could be looking at something like this. So if you can understand this code, where you are working with the MongoDB shell directly, look at the code that you would write in the Node.js world. It's almost very, very similar, and the same code would work in the Node.js world. So my suggestion is, yeah, start with an Express application and make a HTTP call to the server-side code and send some data back in this form. That's the step one. And once this is ready, you could then remove this hard coding and have this coming from a MongoDB database. And I can just show you what that code looks like. So you would essentially do a MongoDB database connectivity, and for the same router/get contacts, we write a get contacts function, which is now getting the data from the database. So you could basically have some code like this, which is essentially pulling the data from the database, and the response is sent as before, but this time it's actually serializing the data from what it obtained from the database. Right, so this is the next layer that you could build, and I think that's probably the order in which you could be doing it. Okay, so then there's a question about push notifications. Let me see if I have missed out anything, because some questions are getting added in the middle. Yeah, so this is the next question. On push notifications and the use of Node.js in it, there is actually a protocol called WebSockets, which is actually becoming very popular, and it's part of the HTML5 specification. So it's called the WebSockets protocol. And if you understand what the real issue is, HTTP has historically been a a request response protocol, which means if you have a client which is trying to make a call to the server, so this is my client, this is the server, the client has to make a request to the server, and only then the server can actually send a response back, right? So this is how HTTP was designed. Now, why was it designed this way? Because this protocol is 25 years old, and back then it was not designed to build our real-time applications. The reason why this protocol was designed was, Tim Berners-Lee wanted a solution to basically view documents on the internet in a standard format, which happened to be HTML, and he wanted to build a protocol to serve these documents, which happened to be HTTP, right? So in order to serve documents on the web, the request response protocol is perfectly fine. But then today we are using this for building so many applications which are not necessarily following the same form. So as a simple example, if you go to something like Facebook, you probably have two clients who are interacting with each other, and there is a server behind the scenes, and usually the interaction doesn't happen directly from client 1 to client 2, right? So the request goes from the client to the server, and the server has to now somehow contact client 2 and send this information to client 2. Now, how do we do this? So in order to do this, historically, if you look at the last 10 years or so, the way people have tried to do it is either the client keeps making a request to the server, and the server responds with data. It's like basically just polling the server every few seconds, right? And then you have one where you make a request and the server keeps sending back responses on the same request as multiple uh, packets, right? Packets of data. And this is the kind of thing which even Google uses these days, so this is the kind of thing that is used in Google Finance and a few of the Google applications. But what is being standardized right now is this thing called WebSockets, where basically the clients can basically open up a socket communication with the server, and then on this the server has the ability to push data. So now this is one of the protocols that is used, and there are solutions like Socket.io, which actually allows you to do this. There's also quite a few. Yeah, so if you look at Meteor, one of the reasons why it has become very popular is because of its ability to push data. Now, specifically, if you're talking about notifications to phones like Android, probably I'm not the right person because I have not quite worked with it. So, if there's anybody here who probably has some answer to that, you could pitch in. Abhiram, are you talking about the Meteor framework or? Okay, great. Yeah, so Meteor is, yeah, if you look at their demo, it's very nice because you can just go and push some data into the database. Like when I do some simple call like db.context.save, if an application is open, you will immediately see that, that change is reflected in the application, in the UI. Right? So a change in the database actually gets propagated all the way to the client side, and there's some nice patterns that they have followed with regard to the application development here. Okay, so there's one more URL you posted here. Let me just open these. Yeah, so the Meteor framework gives you this ability. So essentially, Meteor actually uses something like WebSockets behind the scenes to get this work. Yeah, with regard to Android, I have not actually quite worked with it. So the notifications here, I'm not quite sure about what is the technology behind that. So yeah, I'm just going to paste this URL so that in case you guys want to have a look at it, you could be doing that. Okay. So the other is Meteor. Okay. So the other question that you have asked is how can one shift from an already existing application which is made with PHP and SQL site to Node.js and MongoDB? I think you should just take it one thing at a time. As a case study, our application was built with MySQL and Python based MVC framework that we used, and the client side was actually built with jQuery. So what we ended up doing is the very first thing you need to do is you need to have a very clearly defined interface between these various layers, which are completely agnostic of the other layers, right? So your client, your server, and your database should be in such a way that any of these can be changed without the other needing any change. And the way you do it is probably you can go with something like JSON anywhere, right? JSON everywhere. So you could use JSON as a data format. So if you're thinking about an application where you have PHP over here, sorry, something like jQuery over here, and you have a PHP based framework or just PHP over here, and you have a relational database over here, you could start with any of the layers, but basically first thing to ensure is, can you just migrate one of these? Can you just go from jQuery to Angular without changing the other two layers at all? And the way it would work is make sure that this entire interface here works with JSON. So you can push JSON into the server, you can receive JSON from the server. and it doesn't really matter, who is serving that JSON. So tomorrow you can migrate from PHP to a Node.js based MVC framework very easily, as long as these interfaces are managed properly. So yeah, the first thing to ask yourself is, are you following this? If not, the first thing you may want to do, if you don't want to have a downtime, is just start migrating these layers and make sure all these layers start talking JSON. JSON is by far one of the most popular data formats, so you would have very good support for it across the board. So in fact, in the Angular world, there is a nice REST API based utility called REST Angular. So you could be looking at something like REST Angular. So when you're integrating Angular with a REST API. So first thing is servicify the PHP layer and make sure that you can easily switch from jQuery to Angular over here. So you could do this first, right? So the other two layers are still the same, but now your client side has completely moved to Angular. Okay, and once this is completed, you could essentially then, okay, so some places where you might still fail is you may have some dependencies on in the way the authentication happens and stuff like that. You could probably still serve those pages from the old site until the complete migration is done, right? So do this first, and then start looking at this layer. And this layer, if you really look at any MVC framework for that matter, if you really break it down into what the MVC framework does right from the time your request comes in till the time the response goes out, there are some very clear patterns here. So the first thing that happens is URL mapping to some kind of a controller function, and the controller somehow then contacts the database, and then probably it takes this data into some kind of a view renderer, and we call this as a template renderer or something like that, right? So yeah, you have a template engine which is actually doing the job of taking the data and converting it into some kind of a presentation, or we call it as a view, right? So this is the kind of thing that happens here. Now the first thing is your server side more heavy or is your client side more heavy, in the sense that are you doing things like templating in the server or in the client? If you're doing it in the server, probably this is the next thing that you would also move. So or maybe this is the first thing you would move, move this thing into the client side and do your complete template rendering in the client itself, and let the server send data back instead of HTML. Okay, so this is one of the changes you could do. So move from being a multi-page application into a single page application. So, and after that, you could look at this particular layer and say, okay, now can I servicify my database? So can I just have like a HTTP interfacing over here, right? You could use HTTP, or if you're using any other thing, you could use something like Thrift maybe. And Thrift allows you to do cross-language communication. So you could literally have one part of your application built with Python, one part with PHP, a third with Java, and you can have all of these layers, all of these pieces talking to each other. So that's quite possible, and so this is the next thing you would do, which is to servicify the database layer. And then you could basically just migrate either your PHP code into Node.js, or you could switch your database. Now, let me just give you a little bit on, what are the patterns with regard to migrating from the relational world to MongoDB. Or any NoSQL world for that matter, right? So when you're moving from relational to NoSQL, what are some of the things you need to take care of? See, in the relational world, data is flat. So you have like multiple tables which are all connected to each other with primary foreign key relationships and stuff like that, right? For example, suppose you have, people having many emails. You would probably have you know people sitting in one table, email sitting in another one, and probably there is a joint table which is saying that for this person these are the emails, right? uh, or something like this, right? So if it's a M2N relationship, you would have a joint table like this. Or if it is not, If it's like a one-to-N relationship, you would then have, maybe the primary key of the person table sitting in the email table as a foreign key. If you look at the NoSQL world, what we essentially do is we store the data in the joined form, which basically means there is nothing like a join, right? So joins are not there when it comes to NoSQL. You persist an entire object, and the object can be hierarchical in nature. You could say that for this person, these are the list of emails, right? And you store all the emails, everything as probably just one document in MongoDB. So when doing this, one of the problems you face is in the migration, which is you have data which is relational in nature and you have to convert it into some form which is hierarchical in the NoSQL world. What is a good way to do it? And here is a pattern that we followed, which is, if you have data sitting in MySQL and you want to migrate this data into MongoDB, don't think of this migration to be like this, right? Don't take the data from MySQL and migrate it to MongoDB directly, but rather write a layer which actually brings the MySQL data. And usually if you have servicified your layer, this is already there. Your MySQL data already comes into some kind of code here, and you can convert it into an object. And the object is already hierarchical in nature. So this is where your ORM frameworks come into picture. And I'm sure if the application is mature enough, you would have some kind of an ORM solution in place. So your data has already been converted into relational form to an object form. So it becomes easier for you to just take that data and then migrate it into MongoDB, right? So these are some of the migration patterns you could use if you want to take data from, the MySQL world and, it's like something from a relational world and move it into a NoSQL world. All said and done, you might run into some challenges. So you need to ensure that you have proper tests in place pre-migration and post-migration to make sure that each of these layers are working properly. Sorry. And the last thing you could do is to migrate this URL to controller mapping, which can be done with something like the Express.js roots and stuff. Okay, so those are some of the patterns you could follow. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but that's probably one of the mechanisms you can use to migrate from a PHP SQL based site to Node.js and MongoDB. Okay, so there's one question from Imran. He's saying, I want to execute Java classes from Node.js using child processes, but the number of processes created is created each time, it's equal to the number of simultaneous requests. This is obviously the case if you're, having your, the request processing actually doing the spawning off of the child process. So it really depends on where you're doing it. If you have designed it as a module which is required, and if that continues to exist, remember that the Node.js process doesn't get recreated every time a request comes in. So because of that, it wouldn't spawn off a child process. It really depends on where you have done it. If you have done it within the request processing cycle, yes, it would actually create a process every time there is a request coming in. If you're doing it outside as part of maybe the initialization of your MVC framework on the sorry, on the server side, then you probably don't, you wouldn't see this issue. That said, what I would actually suggest is maybe there is a slightly different way to do it, which is again to look at servicifying these interfaces. So rather than your Node.js application, being directly connected to your Java application, you could essentially look at something like the Java application exposing some kind of a simple service, which is then used from your Node.js application via a simple REST call. So this is probably a slightly better way to do it, because now the Node.js application is not directly connecting to Java. And if you want, how do we do the servicification? There are many solutions possible. One is you could look at something like CherryPy is in the Python world. You could look at something like Jetty as an embedded server, or you could look at something like Thrift. So there is a Thrift possibility where your JavaScript code could basically just talk to the Java function, directly. But it is more like the Node.js application is not necessarily owning the Java application. These two are basically just independent services, and they are just interacting with each other. So I think in that sense, this is probably a slightly better approach you could be using than making a call directly. So let me just give you the links to the things that I just mentioned. So you could be looking at Thrift. Thrift was open sourced by Facebook. So it's like, in the yesteryears, there used to be something called Corba, which was nice as a concept, probably not great with implementation. But yeah, Thrift is something that you could be looking at, and you can see in the description here, they talk about how you can build services that work efficiently and seamlessly across all of these languages. So you do have Java here, and you do have Node.js here, you do have PHP here. So this is something that you could be looking at. The basic idea here is one of the sites exposes a bunch of functions in a standard way, and this standard is basically something like an interface definition, and then the other side then generates stubs, which are like function calls that it can make to basically just get the data. Now the transformation of the object happens automatically. So on one side you would be making a call saying, get me this list of entities from the other side, and on one side the data resides as a Java object, on the other side it gets converted into a JavaScript object. So this inter-conversion of data automatically happens, and it also has yeah, mechanisms to actually servicify. So basically it runs some kind of a port where you can make this call. So that's what Thrift allows you to do. So you could be looking at this, or other solution is something like Jetty. So Jetty allows you to run something called an embedded server. So within your Java application, you can just start a HTTP endpoint, and you can just servicify that layer very easily. So if you want something that can convert your Java objects into JSON, you could probably be looking at something like Extreme, right? So Extreme does come with a JSON converter. So you can take a Java object and just serialize it into JSON. Yeah, and you can then make a curl call on the Node.js end of it. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, so I will, yeah, so somebody wants to speak.
Yeah, so basically, I am a newbie at Node.js, and I really want to explore it more. So, as it was really asked just few moments ago, that how to go about it if you are new to JavaScript. My question is that I'm new to Node.js now. So, what all projects I can take on, and how is there any internship or something I can get? I'm a student, so yeah, I was
Okay.
there's some kind of forum which is asking for node modules which I can create or something something like that.
With regard to possible internship opportunities and stuff, you could probably just get in touch with us offline, and we can talk about, how we can help you out.
Okay.
But just as a generic point about where or how you can get started, remember I told you that Node is not just a server-side MVC framework, and we discussed the fact that Node can actually be used for things like building and testing and code checkers and stuff like that, right? So now if you look at some of the very popular projects, if you go to something like jQuery or AngularJS and all that, and look at how they really get their code to be created. They don't write everything as a single JavaScript file. Okay, the code is actually written as a bunch of individual independent JavaScript files. So they do have multiple modules, and then they actually run some kind of a task which concatenates all of this into a single JavaScript. And they do also run quality checkers, code quality checkers, and things to actually test the code and stuff like that. So probably a good place for you to just get started is you can just clone something like jQuery and learn how you can just compile this. So you can just run a npm install inside jQuery and then run a buffer install and then run a grunt command, and it basically compiles all of the code that is inside this source into
Single file.
so you can, yeah, into all of these JavaScripts will be compiled into a single file. And the same applies to even Angular. If you look at the code base, it is actually all written with Node.js as the utilities to basically concatenate all the files and stuff. So maybe you could just start with something like this, where just try cloning these files and learn how you can combine them, how to run something like npm install, how to learn how to run bower installation, how to do grunt utilities, how to run them and stuff like that. Okay. The other thing you could look at is if you look at the Angular tutorial, you will see that the tutorial is very closely tied to Node, although they don't explicitly mention it. A lot of the things that you learn here, you will have to learn a little bit of Node.js to really get this to work. For example, the test cases that are written here are all they're written as Jasmine test cases, and these test cases need to be executed with something called a karma runner, and karma runner is basically a Node.js utility. So another project that you could be looking at is this project called Angular Seed, where it's like a small seed application which has some end-to-end test cases that they have written to just test out this application. And again, you can see the same set of files here. There's package.json, there's a karma runner, and this is very straightforward because they have kind of given you all the instructions here, so you kind of learn how Node.js works and what are the kind of things people do, right? So you could just follow these things and just get a feel of what it is like to build, rather just compile code and stuff like that with Node.js, right? Once you learn this, you could probably just take up a project of your own, or again, like you said, internships could probably help you out, where you can just use these ideas and start migrating an existing application into Node. So you could try and do what I just described some time back, take an application and try to migrate it to Node. We can help you out with that, and do get in touch with us maybe once the Hangout is over.
All right.
Okay. Great. Anybody else wants to add anything? Any topics that you wanted or got? You have any some thoughts in mind or some questions which are unanswered? We can take that, and then maybe we can just wind up for the day.
Just one thing, that please make sure that you upload it on YouTube, because there were some disturbances, and so just make sure that there's some recording, something, or
I have been recording it. I don't know about the quality of the recording, but I'll definitely upload it to YouTube once this Hangout session is over.
great, great.
Okay. Yeah, any other questions? Great. So before we wind up, I just want one quick thought from you guys, which is, do you, how was the overall experience? I think the Hangout part, we will definitely work on it and make sure that we can the next time. But otherwise, is there anything that you would like to help out with in future, so that we can do this better? We would definitely want to make this more frequent thing so that we can work as a community. But yeah, any thoughts from your side?
Hey, first of all, the session was really great,
Okay.
and thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. So one suggestion I would like to make is if before the session or when you create an event on Facebook or any community, if you can give us the prerequisites or a kind of the agenda of what is going to happen, maybe it will
Right.
help participants to figure out if they can actually attend this or not, because most of the things were really cool to listen to, but I couldn't relate to them.
Okay, great. We usually do this during our offline meetups that we conduct, where
Mhm.
the agenda is very clearly set. So what we typically do is we give out time where they can basically post all their questions in the meetup,
Mhm.
and then we collate everything and decide on the exact agenda. So we do mention
Right,
what are
right.
the things that we are going to cover. This basically happened in a very, very short notice. We decided
Yeah,
to do
yeah, yeah.
this just
Yeah.
just
Maybe
like
for the
quickly.
next time you can just.
Yes, yes. So yeah, your feedback is definitely valid,
Yeah,
and we
but
will
otherwise the
definitely be
session was
doing this
really
better.
great.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
maybe we can have sessions where we will go a little deeper and make it a little more hands-on so you guys can follow along. So today it was more like an overview session on what are the various
Mhm.
pieces and why they exist. Uh, yeah, so next time we'll probably start with very basic things and take one aspect of mean at a time and talk about how it works and how you can get started.
Awesome. That would be great.
Hey
Okay.
Gautam, this is Karthik. That's what I was about to say. I mean, just a little bit of hands-on would help.
Hmm.
As I'm also a newbie to this entire mean stack, so would get a lot of pictures. So this is really a good start. And as you mentioned, like going forward, if it is with a few little bit hands-on, concentrating on one particular area, then it would be a great learning session.
Sure. Good. So yeah, we will definitely be doing more sessions, and what we'll do is we'll be very clear about what we'll be covering during the 2 to 3 hours, and also maybe we will take up some upfront feedback from you on what exactly you would like to have, so that we can do a better match of the participants and on the session time. Great. So yeah, I think thanks, guys, because this was our first session. I appreciate that all of you guys were very patient, and so we will definitely be working on some of the issues that we faced, and let's make sure that the next session we're doing will be really amazing. So yeah, see you guys. And there was question about, do you have offline sessions? Yes, we do have a few offline sessions. Um, and just a quick thing on, I'll be doing a little. We do have paid as well as free sessions. The free sessions that we conduct, we do it in the meetup model, where we usually do it when during the weekends, where one of the companies hosts us and we just conduct a session there. So you guys can go to meetup.com/Gnapti, and you'll find the meetups that we have done in the past. Uh, so most of the sessions that we do here are for free. We do have another one which is like a hackathon model, and hackathon is like a 1 full day program where you can actually come in with a problem statement in mind, and we take one technology that we would have predetermined, and you can actually work on that through the whole day. There's nothing like a set training session during the day, but we do have a lot of short 15-minute sessions where we clarify something or help each other out. And there'll be about 3 or 4 people who just move around helping all the participants. So that is it's a paid session, but the money is usually taken just to organize the space and food for you. And then we do have a final model, which is a paid training which we conduct, and we are slowly moving into the online world, and we're planning to do these as an online training session. So I just wanted to show you quickly, what we normally do. So we have a product in the training space which we call as the Gnapti Virtual Coach. And in the virtual coach, you can basically learn various courses. So we now have courses for a lot of the JavaScript related technologies and frameworks. We have one for jQuery, one for Angular. We have one for Python. We have one for Java. So what we do is you can basically take up one of these courses, and there'll be a bunch of skills that you need to learn. And we have some kind of online browser-based environment where you can actually learn things like this, and you can try it out in the browser. You can basically make modifications. If it is sort of like JS Fiddle, but meant for training, so we have this environment where you can just learn the technology and then try out, and then we give you a problem that you're supposed to solve along with this. And the solution that you post is actually manually reviewed by one of the people in our teams. Okay, so we usually combine this with the online training. So sometime back, somebody asked questions on MongoDB. How do we essentially try out sharding environments and stuff like that? So we are planning to post a few courses for things like MongoDB as well. So what happens is, for any of the server side technologies, we have environment where you can learn the technology in the browser itself. So we give you some kind of an access to a shell like this, and you can just then learn, in the browser itself how to work with this technology. So this is a course for Python. So it kind of explains how to execute this code, and it shows you the output. And this is not a video. You can essentially just come in and start using this environment and learn the technology. So this is a product, and so we try to kind of combine this along with the online training. So if you take up the online training, that's the model in which it will be. Uh, we don't usually compel anybody, so you're free to join our only the meetup sessions. You're free to just come to the online hangouts. If you are interested in the paid trainings, you can do that. And if you happen to be in Bangalore, just drop in sometime. You can meet us in person. Yeah, and people who are looking for internships, we may be able to offer a few ourselves, but we do also work with a few startups, so we may be able to help you out with that. Okay. So yeah, these are some of the things that we do, and any suggestion, any things from your side is appreciated. Okay, great then. So we will wind up the session today. I will be taking this video and posting it in YouTube, so you can take it from there. Great. So yeah, do that you may want for our future meetups. So if you have some specific topic in mind, you're free to post it there, and we can have a online hangout on that. Okay, so thanks guys. It was nice having you over. So have a good night.